With both Scott Dawson and Dash Wilder being released from WWE, now seems like a good time for them to be featured on Bell to Bell. For this episode, I'll be looking at their first and last matches as a tag team, so with that, let's begin. Alright, both Scott Dawson and Dash Wilder got started wrestling around the same time, Dawson making his debut in 2004 and Wilder debuting the following year. Likewise, the mustache member of the Revival was the first to get signed by WWE. Scott Dawson made his NXT debut in 2013 and soon began a tag team with Garrett Dillon, and Sylvester Lefort served as their manager. The group had little success and was disbanded only about a month after it started when Dillon was released from the company. In need of a new partner, Scott Dawson formed a team with Rusev. Like before, the group didn't achieve much, and the Bulgarian Brute eventually left to be managed by Lana. Dawson's WWE career wasn't off to the best start, and to make matters even worse, an injury had forced him to be sidelined for the rest of the year. While he was out of action, Dawson would be paired with one of WWE's newest signees, a man named Dash Wilder. Once Dawson was healed, the duo was ready to make their debut, which took place on July 31st, 2014. The first two men to enter were the Revival's opponents, Mojo Rawley and Bull Dempsey. After that, it was time for Dawson and Wilder to introduce themselves to the fans at Full Sail. However, the team wasn't called the Revival just yet, instead, the Mechanics. Either way, they were all business, as Scott Dawson started the match with Bull Dempsey. The opening of the fight was a battle between Dawson's technical ability and Dempsey's strength, and Bull ended up winning. Mojo Rawley quickly tagged himself in, and the match continued. Thanks to his fast movement, Dawson managed to stun Rawley and quickly tagged in and out with Dash Wilder to execute a series of double team moves. When that didn't work, Wilder began wearing Mojo out with some submission holds. Unfortunately for Dawson and Wilder, it was enough to keep Rawley down, as the former Green Bay Packer overpowered Dash. Bull Dempsey soon became the legal man again and finished off the match by hitting the bulldozer. I don't think this debut was all that good. The ending felt rushed, and while I don't think it was a burial by any means, it certainly didn't make Dawson and Wilder look good in their first appearance. So a bad start for the new tag team, but let's see what happened next. The Mechanics weren't seen much after their debut, only appearing one other time in 2014, where they lost to Enzo and Cass. They mainly performed at untelevised events, and that continued into the following year. They made a few sporadic appearances on TV in 2015, and finally got their first win almost a year after they debuted. Around the same time, they dropped the Mechanics name and simply went by Dash and Dawson. All this really helped get the ball rolling, as they started pursuing the NXT Tag Team titles, and eventually won them in November. Dash and Dawson remained champions for the rest of the year, but 2016 brought with it some change. In February, Dawson and Wilder officially settled on the tag team name, The Revival. They'd have several successful title defenses, up until NXT TakeOver Dallas, where they lost to American Alpha. However, the Revival weren't without their titles for very long, as 2 months later, they won them back. They had another solid run with the belts, until finally losing them to DIY in November. So while their NXT run had a rough start, Dawson and Wilder rebounded, and ended up doing pretty well. But now it's time for them to officially become a part of the main roster. The night after WrestleMania 33, the Revival debuted on Raw, with a victory over the New Day. They hit a bump when Wilder suffered a fractured jaw, which put the team out of commission for a while. They returned a few months later, but then Scott Dawson was injured with a fractured bicep, so the Revival once again went on hiatus. The team finally returned in December of 2017, and thankfully wouldn't be sidelined with any more injuries. 2018 didn't start off well for the Revival, as they suffered their first defeat on the main roster at the hands of Luke Gallows and Carl Anderson. Dawson and Wilder would beat them in a rematch, but didn't do a whole lot more after that. They received a shot at the Raw Tag Team titles during the SummerSlam kickoff, but were defeated by the B Team. Things didn't get interesting until 2019, when it was reported that both Dawson and Wilder had asked for their release. Around the same time, the Revival were feuding with the current Raw Tag Team champions, Bobby Roode and Chad Gable. After several unsuccessful attempts, Scott Dawson and Dash Wilder finally won the belts in February. History kinda repeated itself, as the two lost the championship at WrestleMania 35, which is almost exactly 3 years after they lost their NXT Tag Team Championships. Even more bizarre, the Revival would win back the Raw titles on almost the exact same date that they regained the titles at NXT. However, unlike NXT, the Revival's second championship reign was pretty short-lived, when they were defeated in July. Despite this loss, things arguably got even bigger for the Revival. On the Raw after SummerSlam, Wilder and Dawson would make history when they defeated R-Truth to become the first ever Code 24/7 champions. But like most who have held that belt, they lost it almost instantly. The Revival's momentum picked back up when they went from Raw to SmackDown and aligned themselves with Randy Orton, who was feuding with the New Day. At Clash of Champions, Scott Dawson and Dash Wilder faced off against Big E and Xavier Woods, with the SmackDown Tag Team Championship on the line. Not only did they win the titles, but this victory also made them the first, and so far only team, to win the NXT, Raw, and SmackDown Tag Team Championships. Unfortunately, it was another short title run, as the New Day regained the belts in November. When their partnership with Randy Orton was over, Dawson and Wilder began an alliance with Baron Corbin, which ended almost as soon as it started. But with a new year beginning, it looked like the Revival could have a fresh start, but little did we know that their time in WWE was almost over. The Revival had their final match on the January 31st, 2020 edition of SmackDown. They are one of 4 teams competing for an opportunity at the SmackDown Tag Team titles, the other participants being Heavy Machinery, Lucha House Party, and The Miz and John Morrison. Luckily for the Revival, Dash Wilder got to start the match, as he took on Heavy Machinery's Tucker, who ironically kinda looks like Bull Dempsey. Also like Dempsey, Tucker had the size and strength advantage, which allowed him to take control of the match early on. Wilder became completely helpless when Tucker locked in a bear hug, and things only got worse when Otis was tagged in and continued to squeeze the life out of Dash. Using his head, literally, the legal member of the Revival fought out of the hole and tagged in Scott Dawson. With a fresh body in the match, the Revival was able to easily take control of the situation. All of Dawson's attacks caused Otis to get pushed toward Lucha House Party's corner, allowing Grand Metalik to tag in. Realizing he was in trouble, Dawson tagged out with John Morrison. The Revival watched from the ring apron for a short while, but sprang into action when Metalik attempted a pinfall. Lucha House Party fought back by sending Dawson and Wilder to the outside. Lince Dorado tried to continue the assault with a crossbody, but the Revival decided to introduce the Luchador to the ring post instead. Then, Heavy Machinery got involved by hitting both Dawson and Wilder with suplexes onto the floor. More insanity ensued as Scott Dawson got back to his feet and knocked down The Miz, before getting kicked in the face. Wilder likewise got thrown to the outside as SmackDown went to commercial break. When we returned, the action was back in the ring, but the Revival wasn't tagged in. They eventually decided just to run in, which got them up close with Otis's chest. The Revival couldn't catch a break, as when they got back into the ring, it was Tucker that took them down. After spending some more time on the outside, the Revival came up with a much wiser plan. While Miz and Otis were battling it out, Scott Dawson tagged himself in, unbeknownst to the Heavy Machinery member. When Otis was distracted, Dawson swooped in and almost got the pinfall. Despite the failed attempt, Scott Dawson continued wearing down Otis, and things were going smoothly until Lucha House Party got involved. Chaos ensued as bodies started flying all across the ring. Eventually, it was Lince Dorado and Dawson in the ring, and the masked wrestler was winning. In the nick of time, Dash Wilder interfered, which allowed the Revival to lay out Dorado with 2 top rope moves. Just before they could get the pin, The Miz tossed Wilder out of the ring. Scott Dawson tried to improvise, but received a skull-crushing finale, followed by John Morrison's Starship Pain, which put this contest to an end. I actually really enjoyed how chaotic this match was. Even though I knew who was going to win when I rewatched it, the match still held my attention. The Revival got a decent amount of time in the ring, which was nice being their final match and all. The only thing that really bugged me was at the beginning. Dash Wilder gets bear hugged by Heavy Machinery for well over 30 seconds, and as soon as he's released, he doesn't sell it at all. Maybe it was because it happened early on, but it just really annoyed me. Otherwise, the match was pretty good, but let's find out what happened to the Revival. Dawson and Wilder did appear the next week, aligning themselves with Sami Zayn and Shinsuke Nakamura by attacking Braun Strowman. After that, they weren't seen at all, except for a few untelevised events. The Revival remained quiet until over 2 months after their last match, when it was announced that both Scott Dawson and Dash Wilder were released from their contracts. Normally, WWE wrestlers are subject to a no-compete clause upon leaving, but according to Pro Wrestling Sheet, the Revival aren't under any such requirement. So what happens next? Well, I think everyone's first thought is they could go to AEW, but we'll have to see. However, if that does happen, these tweets could finally become true. So what did you think of the Revival? Did you love them, hate them, or were somewhere in the middle? Let me know in the comments. Then check out the first and last matches of Evan Bourne. With that, I'm Zach from Tap Out Corner, and that was Bell to Bell.